They put her on the platform at noon, when the heat stripped mercy from men and left only truth. Enola stood with her wrists bound, dust clinging to the torn hem of her dress. Blood dried at the edge of her mouth. She did not bow her head. She did not plead. Her eyes moved across the crowd with a steady, measuring calm that unsettled those who met it. Someone laughed, someone spat. A trader spoke of strength, of usefulness, of risk, weighing her life as if it were spoiled grain. Bids rose weakly, half-hearted, then stalled, too defiant to tame, too injured to trust. Silence crept in, thick as the heat. That was when a single voice broke it. $2. Henry Cole stepped forward from the edge of the square, ash still on his sleeves, the smell of iron following him like a shadow. He placed the coins down carefully, as though laying something to rest. "The sale can end here," he said quietly. The rope fell away. Enola lifted her eyes to him, and for the first time that day, something in the air shifted. Before we continue, please take a moment to support the channel. A simple like, a quick comment, or hitting that subscribe button helps these Wild West tales reach more people who love them. Thank you for riding along. Red Willow Crossing sat where the land thinned and the sky seemed too large for the people living beneath it. The town clung to the edge of southern New Mexico like an afterthought, built from sun-bleached timber and habit rather than hope. Wind dragged dust through the main street, rattling loose shutters and carrying the smell of iron. Animals, and old sweat. Men came here to pass through, to trade, to forget. Very few stayed because they believed in the place. Enola was led away from the square without ceremony. No one watched for long. In Red Willow Crossing, curiosity faded quickly once a transaction ended. She walked stiffly, pain flashing through her side with every step, keeping her face still so no one would read weakness there. Her dark hair hung loose, tangled by days of travel and hands that had not been gentle beneath the grime. Her posture remained straight, as if memory alone held her upright. She had learned early that dignity was something taken only when surrendered. Henry Cole's forge stood beyond the last row of buildings, where the town thinned into scrub and rock. The structure was low and square, built of stone darkened by years of smoke. An anvil rested near the open door, scarred and smooth from use. Inside, tools hung where hands could find them without thought. The forge fire burned low, steady, disciplined. It was the sort of place shaped by routine rather than comfort. Henry walked ahead of her, not looking back. He moved with the economy of a man long accustomed to work that demanded precision. His shoulders carried strength earned slowly, not the quick hardness of youth. A faded scar traced the line of his forearm, pale against weathered skin. Another marked his neck, half hidden by his collar. An old reminder from a time he did not discuss. He spoke little because words, to him, had always cost more than they were worth. He did not take Enola inside. Instead, he set a tin cup of water on a crate near the forge wall, along with bread wrapped in cloth and a folded blanket. Then he stepped away, returning to his tools as if she were a presence to be acknowledged rather than managed. Beyond the forge lay a small patch of land Henry had claimed for himself. A fence leaned where it should have stood straight. Rows of vegetables struggled in the dry soil, planted with more determination than knowledge. A few chickens scratched half-heartedly near a sagging coop, their feathers dull, their movements cautious. The place showed effort, not mastery, survival, not abundance. Henry had left the army years earlier. Though the habits of service had never fully loosened their grip, he had repaired wagons and weapons, shod horses for men who did not ask where the road led next. Silence had kept him fed. Distance had kept him alive. Now he lived on the edge of things, working iron and tending land with the same quiet discipline, asking nothing of anyone. Enola took in all of this without comment. The space, the restraint, the absence of command. She lowered herself carefully onto the crate, wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, and drank the water in slow, measured sips. The forge fire crackled softly nearby. For the first time since her capture, the world did not press in from all sides. That alone made her wary. Enola stayed because her body allowed no other choice. The pain in her side flared whenever she moved too quickly, a deep ache that reminded her though how thin the line was between standing and falling. She kept count of her breaths, learned the rhythm of the place by listening. The forge woke before the sun. Henry's hammer struck iron in steady intervals, each blow measured, controlled. The sound carried across the scrubland and settled into her bones, less a threat than a reminder that time was still moving. Henry did not ask questions. He did not tell her where to sleep or when to eat. Each morning, water appeared near the wall. Bread followed. Sometimes a small portion of beans or meat joined it. He placed the food down and walked away, leaving her to decide what to do with it. The absence of instruction unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. She waited for the moment his patience would thin, for the look that said she now owed him something. It did not come. On the third morning, she tested the edge of his silence. Why, she asked, her voice rough from disuse. Henry did not stop working. He turned a piece of iron with his tongs, watching the color shift in the heat. Because you needed time, he said. That wasn't the question. He glanced at her then, briefly. His eyes were pale, steady, unreadable. It was the answer I had. She said nothing more. Words, she knew, could be turned into hooks. As the days passed, strength returned slowly. She began walking farther from the wall, circling the forge, noting where the ground dipped and where stones loosened underfoot. Henry noticed, though he did not comment. He noticed most things, the way she flinched at sudden noise, the way she positioned herself with a clear view of the path leading in from town, the way her hands stayed near her body, as if guarding something unseen. At night, the desert cooled sharply. Wind slid through the grass and rattled the fence. Enola slept lightly, waking often, listening for footsteps, more than once. She rose and found Henry seated outside the forge, repairing a tool by lantern light. He never looked up when she passed. He never asked where she was going. That freedom weighed on her more heavily than chains on the fifth day. She ventured toward the garden. The soil had been broken with effort but little understanding. Seeds lay too close together in some places, scattered too thin in others. Water had been poured generously, then withheld too long. The plant struggled in ways she recognized immediately. She knelt, pressing her fingers into the earth, testing its dryness. Henry watched from a distance. She did not ask permission. She shifted one row, thinning it carefully. She moved a stone to block the worst of the wind. She fixed the water trough so it no longer leaked. When she finished, she stepped away, saying nothing. That evening, Henry noticed the difference. The leaves held their shape. The chickens lingered near the coop rather than wandering off. He nodded once, more to himself then to her. "You've done this before," he said later, as they sat near the fire. "Yes, for yourself, for my people." The words hung between them, unadorned. Henry did not press further. He added another piece of wood to the fire and adjusted the kettle. Something in his restraint eased the tightness in her chest. A few nights later, rain threatened but did not arrive. Thunder rolled far off, a sound like memory rather than warning. Enola sat with her back against the forge wall, watching sparks drift upward. Henry cleaned his tools in silence. "You don't lock the door," she said. "There's no door worth locking," he replied. "That's not what I meant." He set the cloth aside. "I learned a long time ago that fear doesn't keep people safe. It only keeps them small." She studied his face in the low light, the lines cut deep by sun and years. He had the look of a man who had already paid for his lessons. "When I was taken," she said quietly, "it wasn't by strangers." Henry did not react. He waited. "They knew our names." He nodded once. "Then you know this land teaches people how to hide themselves." She did not respond, but the tension in her shoulders eased slightly. That night, she slept through until dawn. In the morning, Henry found her working in the garden again, slower this time, careful not to strain her side. He handed her a tin cup of water and sat on the fence, watching the sun lift over the horizon. For the first time since the platform, Enola allowed herself to believe that staying might not be a mistake. That thought frightened her more than anything that had come before. The days settled into a rhythm neither of them named. Henry rose before first light, as he always had. He fed the fire, checked the tools, walked the line of fence with a practiced eye. Enola followed later, moving carefully, gauging what her body would allow. Pain no longer ruled her steps, though it still whispered reminders when she forgot herself. They worked near one another without speaking much, the space between them shaped by choice rather than caution. The garden became the quiet center of that rhythm. Henry approached it with the same discipline he gave the forge, measuring rows, straightening posts, fixing what bent or broke. He treated the soil as if it were iron that simply needed enough effort to yield. Enola watched for a time, then began adjusting his work in small ways. She showed him how to read the ground before touching it, how to wait for the morning cool before watering, how to shade fragile shoots with scraps of cloth until they hardened. She did not correct him outright. She demonstrated, then stepped back. Henry noticed how little she wasted. Water was carried in careful amounts. Seeds were saved, not scattered. When a plant failed, she did not curse or linger over it. She pulled it cleanly and set another in its place. Loss, to her, was something acknowledged and then left behind. One afternoon, Henry broke a stem while trying to prop it upright. The snap was sharp, final. He stood there longer than necessary, the broken piece in his hand, as if waiting for it to change its mind. Enola knelt beside him and took the stem without comment. She set it aside and pressed a new seed into the earth. "It won't grow," he said. "Not this one," she replied. "Another will." He exhaled slowly. "Iron can be reheated." She glanced at him, then back to the soil. "Living things don't listen that way." The words stayed with him long after the sun dropped behind the low hills. In the evenings, they shared meals by the forge. Sometimes Henry spoke of practical matters, a tool that needed replacing, a fence post that would not hold. Enola listened, offering quiet solutions when she had them. Other nights passed with nothing but the sound of eating and the crackle of embers. The silence felt different now. It no longer pressed against them. It rested. Henry began to notice changes in himself. He slept more deeply. His hands, once always clenched around a task, loosened when there was nothing to hold. He caught himself waiting for Enola's presence in the garden before starting certain chores, as if the work itself made more sense when done together. She, too, shifted in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. She no longer flinched at the ring of the hammer. She hummed sometimes while working, a low sound that carried memory rather than tune. She stopped positioning herself with a clear path to escape at all times. Trust did not announce itself. It crept in quietly, disguised as habit. One evening, as dusk pulled the heat from the land, Henry brought out a small crate he had been repairing. Enola watched him secure the final joint, his movements careful, deliberate. "For the chickens," he said. "They keep wandering." She examined it, ran her fingers along the edges. "They'll stay if they feel sheltered." "I've tried," he replied. "They still roam." She looked toward the coop, then back at him. "They don't know this place yet." Neither did he, really. As the weeks passed, Enola's strength returned fully. She moved with ease now, her posture relaxed, her eyes less guarded. Henry found himself telling her things he had not intended to say. Small details at first. How the forge had once been busier. How the town had felt different when he first arrived. How quiet followed him wherever he settled. One night, after a long day, he spoke of the army without naming it directly. He described roads that stretched too far, orders that came without explanation, work done for reasons that no longer made sense when remembered alone. "I fixed what they brought me," he said, staring into the fire. "I told myself that was all I did." Enola listened without interruption. There were times, he continued, when not speaking felt easier than choosing a side. She did not look at him then. "Silence keeps a person alive," she said. "It doesn't always let them live." He nodded. The truth of it landed without resistance. Later that night, wind moved through the fence, carrying the scent of dust and new growth. Henry found Enola sitting near the garden, hands resting in her lap, eyes closed. "You could leave," he said quietly, "any day." She opened her eyes. "I know. I won't ask you to stay. That's why I am." The answer surprised him with its simplicity. From that point on, their work changed. It was no longer something done side by chance. They planned together. They set aside sections of land, argued gently over where to plant what, laughed once when a goat escaped, and led them both on a slow, undignified chase. The sound startled Henry. He could not remember the last time laughter had come from him without effort. The forge still burned. The hammer still rang. Yet something had shifted beneath those familiar sounds. The land responded. The plants took hold. The animals grew calm. And in the midst of that ordinary labor, Henry realized that he had stopped counting the days. He did not know when the feeling had taken root, only that it was there now, steady and unforced, a sense that what he was building was no longer meant to be endured alone. Enola stood beside him one morning, surveying the garden as sunlight caught the leaves. "This place is changing," she said. Henry watched the wind move through the rows, felt the quiet weight of her presence at his side. "So am I." She met his gaze, and for the first time, there was no question there, only recognition. The first time Henry noticed the stranger, he did not give him a name. The man arrived mid-morning, riding a lean bay horse that had been worked hard and fed little. He dismounted with the ease of someone accustomed to being watched and not caring who did the watching. His coat was clean enough to suggest intention rather than comfort. His boots polished in a way that didn't belong to Red Willow Crossing. He greeted Henry with a practiced smile and asked about a small repair. Nothing urgent, nothing costly. Henry took the measure of him without comment. Enola had been carrying water from the well. She stopped when she saw the man's face. The pause was brief, almost invisible, but it rippled through her body. Her shoulders tightened. Her hand clenched around the bucket handle until her knuckles paled. Then she lowered her gaze and continued walking, passing the stranger as if he were no more than another customer. The man did not acknowledge her. His eyes slid past her presence with deliberate indifference, as though she were part of the ground beneath his boots. Henry saw all of it. He finished the repair and named a fair price. The stranger paid without complaint, lingering longer than necessary, asking questions about the forge, the land, the animals. Henry answered only what was required. When the man finally rode off, dust trailing behind him, Enola set the bucket down with more force than needed. "He'll be back," she said quietly. Henry did not ask how she knew. People usually are. The man returned 2 days later. Then again, the following week. Each visit carried the same pattern: polite conversation, small commissions, careful avoidance of Enola's name, her eyes, her history. To anyone else, he was simply another trader passing through. To Enola, he was a ghost that refused to stay buried. She said nothing. At night, Henry noticed the change in her sleep. She woke more often, rising before dawn to walk the edge of the land. Her hands stayed close to her body again. The calm she had grown into began to fray at its edges. Henry did not press her. He waited, the way he had learned to wait for metal to cool before shaping it further. On the 4th visit, the stranger stayed after Henry finished his work. "You've done well for yourself," the man said, gesturing toward the garden and the animals. "Quiet place. Productive." "It's enough," Henry replied. The man's gaze shifted, resting briefly on Enola before sliding away. "Some people prefer quieter arrangements," he said. "Less attention, less complication." Henry met his eyes. "Say what you mean." The smile tightened. "Ideal in opportunities, labor, transport, placement. I hear you came into possession of something valuable." Henry's voice did not rise. "You heard wrong." The man studied him for a moment, the way a gambler watches a table. "You might reconsider. There's money in these things, if you know how to move them." "I don't," Henry said. The refusal landed harder than Henry expected. Not because it cost him anything, but because he recognized the expression that followed. Offense. Not anger yet, but the injury of a man unaccustomed to being denied. The stranger mounted his horse without another word and rode away. That night, Enola sat near the fire, her face drawn tight by memory. Henry joined her, the space between them smaller than it had been before. "You know him," Henry said. She nodded once. The firelight caught her eyes, dark and steady, despite the weight they carried. "He came to our village before the soldiers did," she said. "He spoke our language badly, but kindly enough. He traded. He listened. He learned who was desperate." Henry did not interrupt. When food grew scarce, he offered help, work, passage. He said he would take some of us to places where there was land and safety. Her mouth tightened. "He took me first." Henry felt the words settle heavily in his chest. "I trusted him," she continued. That was the mistake. Silence followed. Not empty silence, but the kind that marked a boundary neither of them rushed to cross. He sold me, she said at last, more than once. Henry leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want him to matter anymore, she replied. And because I needed this place to stay what it is. Henry understood that impulse too well. He asked you for me, she said. It was not a question. Yes. What did you say? Henry looked at her then. I said no. The simplicity of it broke something open in her. She exhaled slowly, as if releasing a breath she had been holding since the man's first visit. He won't leave it there, she said. No. Henry agreed. He won't. Morning came clear and hard. The air held a sharpness that promised heat later in the day. Henry had just begun his work when the sound of multiple riders cut across the land. 4 men approached, horses tied close, eyes alert. The stranger rode at their head. You stole from us, the man said, loud enough for the words to carry. Henry set his hammer down carefully. That's not how I remember it. She was meant to be delivered. The stranger continued. You interfered. Henry turned to the others. He recognized the look. Traitors, not soldiers. Men who measured value by agreement rather than law. I paid for her, Henry said evenly. From your outfit. Fair price. You took the money. The men shifted. One spat into the dirt. She was sold before that. Henry went on. By him. He nodded toward the stranger. Same woman, same buyer, different day. The leader's expression hardened. Is that true? The stranger opened his mouth, then closed it again. Henry pressed on, his voice steady, unhurried. You don't sell the same person twice. Everyone here knows that. Silence stretched tight. The leader dismounted and stepped closer to the stranger. You tried to run us. The denial came too late. Hands seized the stranger's arms. He struggled, curses spilling out, dignity collapsing under the weight of his own schemes. Henry did not move. Enola watched from the edge of the forge, her face pale but composed. She did not look away as the men dragged the stranger back to his horse. Take him, the leader said. We'll settle this. They rode off, leaving dust and the echo of a bargain broken. No one spoke for a long while. Henry finally turned to Enola. He won't come back. She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. You didn't have to stand there, she said. Yes, Henry replied. I did. She studied him, seeing not the man who had once chosen silence, but the one who had chosen differently when it mattered. The forge fire crackled softly behind them. For the first time since the stranger's arrival, the land felt quiet again. And this time, the quiet held. The quiet that followed did not feel fragile. For 2 days after the men rode away with Harlan Pike, no one came to the forge. No curious townsfolk, no whispered questions. Red Willow Crossing had a way of absorbing events without comment, letting consequences settle on their own by the 3rd morning. Life resumed its familiar pace, though something beneath it had shifted. Henry noticed it first in himself. He woke before dawn as usual, but the weight in his chest was gone, not lifted entirely, nothing so simple but eased, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. He went through his routine with steady hands, feeding the fire, checking the tools, walking the fence line. When he reached the garden, he paused. Enola was already there. She was kneeling among the rows, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, her movements unhurried. The plants had taken well in the last weeks. Leaves held their color. The soil no longer cracked as easily beneath the sun. Henry watched for a moment before stepping closer. "They won't bother you again," he said. Enola nodded. "I know." She did not thank him. He had not expected her to. They worked side by side, repairing what had been neglected during the days of tension. A fence post was reset. The chicken coop reinforced. The tasks were ordinary, grounding. With each small repair, the world seemed to settle further into place. Later that afternoon, a wagon passed on the road beyond the land. The driver raised a hand in greeting. Henry returned it. It was the first time he could remember doing so without hesitation. That evening, they shared a meal as they often did, seated near the forge as the heat faded from the stones. The sky burned low and red before giving way to dusk. Enola ate slowly, thoughtful. When he was taken, she said at last, "I expected to feel something sharper." Henry waited. "I felt relief." She continued, "Then nothing." "That's not nothing," he replied. She considered this, then allowed a small nod. "Perhaps not." Silence followed. Comfortable now, the kind that did not demand explanation. "I stayed quiet before," Henry said, breaking it, not just with him, with other things. Enola turned toward him. "I convinced myself that keeping my head down was the same as staying clean." He went on. "It took me years to understand the difference." She studied his face, reading the lines shaped by sun and regret. "You didn't stay clean," she said gently. "You stayed alive. And you?" he asked. "I learned that surviving sometimes means choosing where to stand," she said. "Not just when to run." They sat with that truth between them, neither trying to soften it. In the days that followed, Enola began to move through the land with an ease she had not allowed herself before. She walked into town when supplies were needed, head high, pace steady. No one stopped her. No one questioned her presence. A few faces looked away. Others nodded in passing. That was enough. Henry found himself speaking more, though still sparingly. He discussed plans for the land, repairs that would take time, ideas he had never voiced because there had been no one to hear them. Enola listened, offered suggestions, challenged him when his thinking stayed too narrow. One evening, as they sat watching the last light fade from the hills, Henry spoke without planning to. "I don't want you to feel obligated to stay," he said. "Not because of what I did, not because of what you've been through." Enola did not answer immediately. She looked out over the garden, the fence line, the animals settling for the night. "I stayed because this place stopped asking me to disappear," she said. "And because you never asked me to belong on your terms." He nodded, accepting that for what it was. Weeks passed. Summer leaned toward fall. The air cooled at night, carrying the scent of earth and change. The land gave back more than it had before. The work grew easier, shared knowledge turning effort into rhythm. One morning, Henry brought out a small box he had kept wrapped and untouched for years. Inside lay a simple ring, worn thin by time, never offered to anyone because there had never been a moment that felt honest enough. He did not kneel. He did not speak grandly. "I would like to build a life with you," he said, "publicly, properly, if that is something you want." Enola looked at the ring, then at him. The past did not vanish from her eyes, but it no longer ruled them. "Yes," she said, "it is." Their marriage took place quietly, witnessed by a handful of people who understood the value of not looking away. No celebration followed, no speeches, just signatures, shared glances, and the steady certainty of a choice made freely. Time did what time does. The land flourished. A child's laughter joined the sounds of hammer and wind. The garden fed more mouths than before. The forge stayed busy. But Henry no longer measured his worth by how much he could endure alone. Sometimes, in the evenings, he watched Enola with their child in her arms and thought of all the moments he had once let pass in silence. He did not regret what he could not change. He was too busy tending what he had chosen to keep. Years later, people stopped calling it Cole's Forge. They called it the place where things took root. The land changed first. The fence straightened. The soil deepened. What had once been a stubborn patch of ground learned how to give. The garden fed neighbors during lean seasons, not because anyone asked, but because Enola remembered what hunger did to a person's pride. And Henry understood what it meant to offer help without asking for gratitude in return. Their home did not erase what came before it. It stood beside it, honest and unadorned. The forge still rang each morning, iron shaped by hands that had learned restraint as well as strength. The garden answered with quiet persistence, green against the dust, patient against the sun. Their child grew between those two truths. He learned early that labor carried dignity, and that care, given steadily, could undo harm more surely than force. He heard stories that did not flatter anyone, stories of mistakes, of silence chosen too long, of courage that arrived late but stayed once it came. Nothing was softened for him. Nothing was hidden. Henry watched his son move through the rows one afternoon, small hands brushing leaves without breaking them, and understood something he had missed for most of his life. Redemption was never a single act. It was a practice. It lived in what a person refused to repeat. Enola carried her past without letting it weigh her forward steps. She did not teach her child to forget. She taught him to remember clearly, so memory would sharpen judgment rather than harden the heart. She knew now that survival alone was not freedom. Freedom arrived when a person chose how to live after surviving. Red Willow Crossing remained what it had always been, a place shaped by heat, wind, and the choices of ordinary people. It did not transform overnight. It did not become gentle. Yet there were moments, small and unremarkable, when someone spoke up sooner than they once would have, when a glance lingered instead of turning away, when a transaction ended because one person decided it should. That was the lesson the land held. The past could not be undone. It could only be answered. And in answering it through work, through honesty, through standing when silence would have been easier, Henry and Enola built something that endured, not because it was perfect, but because it was chosen.